Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to talk about the psychology of people who don't have friends or who don't have many friends. We're going to first define it by the research, and then we're going to talk about the pros and the cons, and then we'll wrap it up, okay? So, how do we define a person who does not have friends? Based on research. So, this perspective is based on having few or no friends, and so that would be actually minimal to absent close friendships in comparison to, let's say, acquaintances. So that's the definition based on the research done in 2023. What we have defined it as is a condition to which an individual reports having no or very few close friends or mutually reciprocated friendship ties rather than simply being socially isolated or lonely from the perspective of that individual. Okay. So that's the research. A little bit of this was also drawn from the research done in 2024. All research will be in the description box. And so, what are the pros actually? What are the positives to being an individual who fits this definition that we just spoke about? You will have a greater sense of autonomy, as well as fewer social obligations. Individuals with few or no friends may experience more freedom and choose solitude and fewer interpersonal demands. This research was done in 2023, and it's kind of, the research was interesting. It's kind of looking at the balance between solitude and socializing. And we kind of see the benefits and kind of the things that are not so beneficial based on an individual's well-being, perhaps even their perspective, temperament, things of that nature, based on this quantity of friends that we're kind of looking at together. The next pro is actually an opportunity for self-reflection, growth, and also, I would almost want to say, some form of authentic maybe alignment to who you are as yourself. When solitude is voluntary, so we're looking at it from that perspective, this can actually foster self-determined motivation, more autonomy, as we talked about, but also competence in yourself. This can actually also improve self-esteem. This research was done in 2018, and looking at the autonomy portion was 2019. Sorry, the motivation portion, not the autonomy portion. The next attribute that we can contribute to a positive aspect based on individuals who define themselves or perceive themselves with not many friends or none at all is actually, we do see that there is a stress reduction in contexts of, I want to say, like conflicting social networking. I'm going to explain it in more detail. This research was done in 2018. Basically, individuals who basically are almost embedded in these demanding social networks, they actually tend to have a very high level of stress, and their tolerance towards that is not actually improving that much. And so it's almost like they're continuously in a very stressful environment, but because it's a social network and not necessarily a living situation, they're not necessarily gaining as much tolerance from it. So they're almost continuously feeling this off and on type of stress, to which individuals who have fewer friendship obligations, actually we see that there is a reduction of exposure to that particular type of stress. They're not worried about these type of things nearly as often because there aren't variables to actually do so. The next attribute that we can assign as a positive variable to individuals who don't have friends or not many friends, and I think a lot of you guys know this, this personally is one of my favorite characteristics because I think this is a very huge benefit. I think there's a balance, but this one is really awesome. We're seeing less risk of negative peer influences. Few close friends may reduce exposure to peer-based risk behaviors, okay? This research was kind of related on that concept of like the friendship paradox, right? 2016. This is so cool. I really love this because I see this a lot when I'm practicing. Folks who have less friends, from my small sample size, I actually see they do less risky behaviors. Like I've noticed that. And this research kind of says that it almost is like they're not influenced as easily. And these folks tend to be a little bit more independent. It's almost like they don't need that, validation from other folks. And so they're okay with saying no, which could make them kind of pull away from certain friend groups, because if a friend group is doing things that might not be healthy or might not constitute to a healthy life from your standard, you're going to end up detaching from that friendship to which you're also not being influenced. Whereas folks who maybe they're afraid of that type of isolation, they actually lean in or engage in that peer influence, whether or not it's healthy for them. So that's very interesting, okay? And the last one of the pros, there are plenty, but I'm just trying to make this video a little bit concise. This research was done in 2022, and we actually see that individuals who don't have many friends or have a select few friends, they actually tend to have like a higher quality, based on the research, higher quality ties rather than many ties that are not very important or imperative to their mental health, right? Some people may choose very few but very satisfying friends rather than friends who do not necessarily add much benefits, which can actually deter from a beneficial lifestyle. Rather, they choose friends that are only very selective based on their perception. Again, research done in 2022, very interesting research. That one was among adolescents, but I still think that we can look at it because it's a systematic review. You can see multiple different research. You can apply that to adults. I did. I think that was really interesting. And adult research is not as commonly looked at in our field. We're most like in psychology, the most things we look at is like behavioral issues, marital issues, conflict, things of that nature. So that's why that one is adolescent. Still think it's interesting. So let's talk about the cons, right? I think most things in life, there's good and bad. What are the risks of an individual who may not have many friends? They have an actual increased risk of, I want to say, internalizing any sort of behavioral issues, such as, or symptomatic issues, depression, anxiety, clinical issues, etc., that are associated with poor friendship or low social contact. So you might have an increase of anxiety because you're not necessarily breaking those loops or behaviors, similar to depression. Research was done in 2015. And I think a lot of people know this. I think it's a balance though, right? Too much can also create some of these symptoms as well. Something to keep in mind. Research done in 2023. This one might be triggering. So I would recommend, if you don't want to hear too triggering stuff, click off. How you feel is very important, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it. Folks, based on this research, that have a lack of, that was part of the research, lack of friend or family visits actually have an increased risk of mortality. And that is, I'm not going to go into too much details about it. This is on YouTube, but if you're curious, 2023, you can look into that research. It is in the description box, okay? The next one is that this research was done in 2010, and I'm going to explain it. It's a little hard to explain. Friendship in of itself, or connections, actually creates a buffer against stress. And when you have a lower social support, you actually don't have that. So fewer friendships might actually mean fewer emotional and instrumental supports when needed. So that might increase negative vulnerability. So you might be vulnerable to certain things that other folks are not, simply because you're not necessarily engaging with those deep ties, if that makes sense, okay? The next one and the last one is that actually research done in 2014, this one's interesting because I do see this a lot. Basically, and I think this is pretty obvious, but still, having fewer friendships does mean that you have fewer opportunities for social capital and social integration, as well as protective factors against life course risks. So example, health decline. If you are struggling with your health and you don't have any friends to help you out, it can be very risky. Let's say you have a surgery and you don't have the means to hire someone to drive you and drop you off and then pick you up. You don't have friends to do that either. And so that can be very difficult. Surgery is very important. So you're either going to put yourself in a financial situation because you need to hire somebody to do that, or let's say you're unemployed, you don't have somebody that you can stay with, live with, or borrow money from. This can be pretty frustrating, okay? So these are some of the details. Again, speculative. There is, of course, research. It's not necessarily fully speculative, but I think it's important that research in general, everything is based on bias still. Research, we try not to make it as biased as possible, but of course people are doing this, okay? So we all have bias. We all have things to learn. This is just a video for information. I'm not telling anybody how to live their life or anything like that, okay? I hope this video was helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.